Thank you all for having me, first of all, on this Saturday morning. My name's Shelby Cox. I work at the Kendall Reagan Nutrition Center at Colorado State University. And my hope today is just to talk with you all about eating well with scleroderma and addressing some of your specific symptoms or thinking about opportunities to improve just our overall nutrition. That is my goal here today. So just a little bit about me. I'm the director of the Kendall Reagan Nutrition Center, and I specifically work in this area of nutrition therapy for GI concerns. And I'm certified via Monash with a low FODMAP diet, which I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about today. But I also work in the area of food allergies and intolerances. And my specialty area, I'm a certified specialist in obesity and weight management. I also work in this space as well. So I'm bringing all of these things together today to try and give you a dynamic presentation on all the things that we might want to consider with scleroderma. As far as my objectives for us today, I really just want to help you all to understand why nutrition is so critical to scleroderma and addressing some of the symptoms that come along with that, as well as some key nutrition messages just for overall healthy eating. And then also just talking with you a little bit about choosing an appropriate diet for your unique scleroderma experience, because I do understand that this looks different for each of you. And so we just want to talk about some of the ways that this might vary depending on your experience. So first of all, scleroderma and nutrition should go hand in hand always, right? Establishing a balanced diet that emphasizes food, fights inflammation, provides energy, protein, vitamins, minerals, all of these really critical nutrients is paramount. Really, any of the foods that we eat can affect our health in a variety of ways, in good ways and in bad ways, right? Depending on what we're choosing to eat. Nutrient-dense foods are going to fuel the body, and processed foods can be potentially harmful. And this doesn't necessarily matter our age or our health status, right? This can be the case. But especially in instances like scleroderma, a nutritious diet really has to take center stage. Individuals that have scleroderma are at risk for malnutrition, nutrient deficiencies, and malabsorption. And even when you're making your best attempts to eat a healthy diet, these can be concerns. And this is really can be caused by a variety of issues, including just poor absorption, right, or inadequate overall intake. And so there's a lot of pieces that could feed into these risk factors that we're talking about today. And one of the really big concerns when we're talking about something like malnutrition, some of the things that we would say are signs of malnutrition are also things that are just underlying scleroderma itself. And so it's really difficult to differentiate the difference between, is this a scleroderma symptom or is this a malnutrition symptom, or both, right? Or are those connected? And so this can be really challenging. And, really one of the things that we say is if you experience any really new or worsening symptoms, such as increased weight loss, increased fatigue, things like that, those would be signs that these risk factors like malnutrition or malabsorption are present. And that would be a good time to reach out, especially for additional help. But that's a good way to identify maybe if these are new or worsening. All right, so first, before we jump into the specifics of managing symptoms of scleroderma, I just want to talk about diet basics, because the best way that we can manage most of our symptoms is to get a really well-balanced, nutrient-dense diet. And so we're just going to talk about kind of nutrition 101 to start, and then we'll jump into kind of the specifics here in a bit. So the first thing is thinking about getting a well-balanced and well-rounded total intake. So due to issues with absorbing nutrients, like we just talked about, malabsorption being a really big concern, individuals with scleroderma really can't afford to miss out on any of these groups, because each of the nutrients that we get from these important food groups are critical to some of the experiences and symptoms that you might have. So in order to get this high quality diet pattern that we're talking about, these are the 5 food groups that you can see here that we want to make sure to include. So that's lean proteins, grains, vegetables, fruit, and dairy, or dairy alternatives if you don't tolerate cow's milk or cow's milk or dairy. And really, when we're thinking about an overall meal pattern, we want to think about this plate, right, as a visual, trying to, balance our day. Even if we thought about our whole day on a big, giant plate, right, does it look proportioned similar to this? So seeing half of our plate coming from fruits and vegetables, a little over a quarter coming from grains and starchy foods, and then protein with our dairy on the side. Any given meal, especially lunches and dinners, it can be helpful to choose at least 3 of these food groups. That's going to give us the balance that we're looking for to help us feel full and satisfied, to provide a good nutrient balance, and also be lasting when we're talking about energy and fatigue. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through each of these groups and talk about why they're important, how we can, maximize these food groups and what foods we could choose to meet these goals. So in unpacking the plate, we're going to start with vegetables because they make up the biggest portion of the Choose My Plate kind of graphic that we're looking at. So you'll see that highlighted over here on the right? We have our vegetables in that bottom left corner. Our goal overall is to make at least half our plate fruits and vegetables. And that doesn't mean we have to have fruits and vegetables at every meal. But like I said, across the day in our pattern is half of what we're eating coming from those two groups. Especially at lunches and dinners, we might want to focus on getting even half of our plate from vegetables specifically. These can be really important for a variety of reasons. They have fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But specifically, we know that eating adequate amounts of vegetables can help reduce our risk of heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes. And then we're going to talk also about some of the specific vitamins and minerals in our vegetables and how they can help address some of our concerns with, especially when we're talking about GI motility and GI concerns. These can be really important. And then also our rich colors, right? We talk a lot about eating the rainbow, and this goes for our fruits and our vegetables. And really, we want to focus on these deep, dark colors like our reds, oranges, and dark greens. So next, we're going to look at fruits. So when we're talking about, when we're talking about fruit, this could include fresh fruit, this could be dry fruit, or 100% fruit juice. All of those count within this category. And fruits are really just rich in these essential nutrients that we often underconsume. So things like potassium, dietary fiber, vitamin C, folate, right? And so really these nutrients are important. And so by consuming fruits, we can make sure that we're getting adequate amounts of those. And so things like potassium, for example, is really important for heart function, for example, and we can get that from bananas or prunes or peaches or apricots or cantaloupe, melons, things like that. But dietary fiber is probably the biggest piece of this. And really that's going to help us with this heart health piece that we're talking about. But also when we talk about digestion, if you're experiencing any concerns with digestion, fiber is a really key component in that. And this is one of the best places we can get both types of fiber, so that insoluble and soluble fiber. And they have, different, but both critical functions. Including adding bulk to our bowel movements and helping things move through our digestive system regularly. So, dietary fiber, especially from fruits, can be really helpful and important. Also, vitamin C, when we're talking about especially in the current climate, when we're talking about, immune health and immune function, getting vitamin C from foods can be really important. But it's also really an important nutrient. We're talking about growth and repair of body tissues, healing wounds and cuts. For example, keeping our dental care. It's great for our teeth and gums as well. So this can be, a really important nutrient to include. And also when we're talking about things like iron later on, iron being really an important nutrient, particularly in scleroderma, including vitamin C sources alongside that can be really helpful for absorption. When we're thinking about fruit and what our best choices are, like I said, this can include juice, this can include dried fruit, but ideally we're choosing fresh and whole fruit. We're going to get the most nutrient value and the most benefit from choosing whole fruit sources most often. All right, and now we're going to jump down to that right-hand corner, which is our protein. So first of all, protein's just the building blocks of all the cells in our body, right? And so we know that getting adequate protein can be really important. And protein kind of is underlying all of the functions in our body. So when I say building blocks, I mean building blocks for our bones, for our muscles, for cartilage, for skin, for blood, right? Enzymes, hormones, all of these things. And so if we're not getting adequate protein, we can imagine there's some disruption in a lot of those different areas. And proteins are one of the areas also that's going to contribute calories. So when we're just talking about getting an overall adequate diet, avoiding malnutrition, protein is one of the really critical things that we're going to look at. When we think about protein choices, we want to choose lean meats as often as possible, or plant-based sources of protein could be a great option as well. Really, when we're talking about inflammation, for example, high saturated fats, which are what we get from animal-based products like meat, high saturated fat in the diet could contribute to that kind of inflammatory kind of state. And so choosing lean meats when possible, and also choosing to eat meatless meals occasionally or include plant-based proteins like beans, nuts, seeds, and also eggs and dairy are going to contribute to this protein piece as well. Also, the recommendation for protein is to eat seafood twice per week. This is related to our goals for getting adequate omega-3s from the diet. And we're going to talk about inflammation a little bit more in detail here in a bit, but omega-3s are a really critical component to that piece as well as to heart health. So trying to include seafood twice per week. If this isn't something that you enjoy or you find difficult, I know we live in a landlocked state, so sometimes good and fresh seafood's difficult. It may be possible that you could supplement with like a fish oil or omega-3 supplement as well. So definitely we want to try and get it from seafood if possible. And then there's also some other plant-based sources of omega-3s we're going to talk about, including walnuts, flax, soybean oils, things like that. All right. And then we're looking at our last quadrant of the plate here, which is our grains category. And grains can be really important because they have several of the nutrients we talked about in our fruits and vegetables, including dietary fiber, but they have a lot of our B vitamins as well, and also great sources of things like iron and magnesium, which we find to be really important in scleroderma specifically. The recommendation for grains is to make at least half of our grains from whole grain sources. So that could be brown rice or quinoa. That could be whole wheat bread instead of a white bread, or it could be whole wheat pasta, for example. But like I mentioned, at least half of those choices should be whole grain. So maybe identifying the things that you would enjoy, including as whole grains, and the more the better, obviously. But I know some people are very specific about, not enjoying brown rice compared to white or whole wheat pasta compared to regular. So make those choices that you prefer, but try and include at least 50% of those from these whole grain sources. The dietary fiber that we were talking about earlier, I can't emphasize enough how important this is because it plays so many roles, right? Not just in our heart health and reducing things like our cholesterol, for example, but in our digestion as well. It can help reduce things like constipation and diverticulitis. And also when we're thinking about specific nutrients, B vitamins, thiamine, niacin, these all play a role in our metabolism that can be really important and help release energy from protein, fat, and carbohydrates that we put in the body. So just helping those things that we're eating work for us. Okay. And then our last small group up here on the right-hand side is our dairy group. And really, like I said, this could also be dairy alternatives. One of the main reasons that we have recommendations for dairy is specifically for that calcium and vitamin D content. And a lot of dairy alternatives are fortified with vitamin D and calcium. And so if you're using an alternative, just make sure that it does have those nutrients added to it so that you're meeting the needs for these. We really want to think about protein as well. A lot of times when we choose alternatives for dairy milk, we choose something like an almond milk or a cashew milk, and these often have less than a gram of protein. So choosing an alternative that also has protein, because we know that it's critical just to get, adequate calories and let alone specifically protein. We want to be careful, especially with alternatives, but even with cow's milk dairy, if they're sweetened, right? Sweetened dairy products are going to have a lot of added sugars to them. And also this includes things like our yogurts, right? When we're talking about sweetened dairy products, yogurts can really ramp up the sugar. And sometimes they taste delicious. If anyone lives up in this area, places like Noosa, for example, their yogurt is delicious, right? But it can be really high in things like added sugar. And so we just want to be cautious of that. And to make sure that, we're being careful of the choices that we're making, reading the labels. We also need to recognize that even if we eat adequate dairy in our diet, it's possible that you might need to supplement things like calcium and especially vitamin D. There are just very limited sources of vitamin D from the diet, and we're really not finding that we get as much from the sun as maybe we once thought. And so we're finding that we're often pretty low in vitamin D and a supplement might be required, but it's still really important to choose dietary sources, even if you are supplementing. We really want supplements of any kind to truly be that, right? A supplement, just filling in some gaps, not really providing our total intake. Okay, so now I'd like to just jump into managing specifically some scleroderma related issues. And I understand that, some of you may experience all of these symptoms I'm about to talk about, or some of you may experience very few of them, but I just want to talk about some of the common ones. And definitely at the end, we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions if you have things related to these specific symptoms you're experiencing. So first of all, fatigue. Really, it's important that we're addressing our energy with our diet. And what I mean by that is eating enough fuel, right, to help our body do what it is meant to do and do all of its functions. And we can't do that if we're not getting adequate calories, period, right? We need to get just adequate total intake. But then we also have to get adequate nutrients, because certain nutrients, for example, iron, we're going to talk about, when we have low iron status, fatigue is going to be one of the most common symptoms that we experience. So in order to address fatigue, one of the first things that we suggest is eating small, frequent meals. This looks like something like every 3 to 4 hours. If you're experiencing involuntary weight loss or having issues with malabsorption, it might be even more frequent than that, up to 5 or 6 meals per day. It's also really important to stay well hydrated. When we're even a little bit dehydrated, this can definitely impact our energy. And so making sure that we're drinking plenty of fluids. And then also exercise, and exercise can be helpful just because it kind of gets some endorphins going and gets things moving that can actually provide us with energy. Sometimes up front it can feel like doing exercise is going to make us more tired, right? But when we're exercising regularly, and we're not talking about having to go to the gym for an hour, right, and working really hard, we're even talking about just walking, stretching, moving your body, but any kind of movement is really going to help with improving our energy. Getting adequate sleep. The recommendation is 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. This is important for a variety of reasons, but right, if we're already dealing with issues of malabsorption and lack of nutrients, and then also we're really tired, these things are just going to kind of stack on top of each other and make it really difficult to get our energy up and be consistent. And then, as I mentioned earlier, low iron is really common in any kind of chronic disease state, but especially in scleroderma. It's really important to, one, have this checked regularly, and then supplement this if necessary, right? We're going to talk about some iron-focused foods, and also taking with that vitamin C source we just talked about earlier to make sure that this is most readily absorbed. The next thing is issues of poor circulation, or what's called Raynaud's phenomenon. Basically, I think someone mentioned earlier, especially when it's getting cold, it can be particularly concerning. But essentially, when we have these kind of blood vessel spasms in our extremities, particularly in the hands, it often happens. We need to work on things that can help increase our circulation. And so one of those things is exercise. Exercise can especially increase circulation to areas that are suffering from limited blood flow. And so again, that doesn't have to be anything super intense. We're just talking about getting some movement and blood flow to those extremities. And then, especially if you're experiencing some finger ulcers related to this, things like animal proteins can be particularly helpful. And the reason for that is they kind of have a trifecta of things that are important for our wound healing to accelerate that, which is our zinc and our iron and our protein. So really thinking about highlighting those foods if you're experiencing that. Some of the best things, and also avoiding caffeine. Caffeine can really cause some of that kind of constricted blood flow, especially to the extremities, and tighten up those blood vessels. So really avoiding caffeine if this is something that you're experiencing. The best things that we can do for this is staying warm, keeping good circulation the best that we can, and then focusing on these foods to promote circulation and wound healing. And then we have tight and thickened skin. The best thing that we can do for our skin is eat vitamin E rich foods. So this specifically comes from nuts and seeds, canola, olive, peanut oil, and also wheat germ. So eating these foods just regularly throughout the diet. And then also a biotin supplement could be helpful. Biotin specifically supports skin and nail health. And so if this is something that you think would be beneficial to you, it'd be worth talking with your physician or a dietitian a little bit more about. All right. And then we have this issue of malabsorption, right, kind of across the board. And when we're talking about decreased absorption, where we specifically see this is in things like calcium, B12, iron, vitamin D, magnesium, vitamin E. So what we want to do, as I mentioned earlier, is still get what we can from our diet, right? Getting a high quality diet first is most important. And then we can discuss based on your unique needs and especially your lab results, what things might require supplementation in your diet. And this is going to vary depending on the types of foods that are most commonly in your meal pattern, and then also how your body's absorbing these specific nutrients. When we're talking about supplements, it can get really complicated because one, like I said, our body kind of handles supplements differently than it does these nutrients when we get them from whole foods because they're combined with all these other nutrients and they kind of work together versus getting a concentrated source. But also, we find that if you're already having issues of absorption and availability of some of these nutrients, taking a supplement, you're going to have similar issues absorbing from a supplement source. And so it can be important to get the right kind, which might be like a liquid supplement, for example, that might be more readily absorbed than like a capsule, perhaps. And then also, things like B12, for example, often an injection is the kind of way that this is supplemented versus taking it from a capsule, for example. And also, depending on how high your needs are, a kind of off-the-shelf supplement you get at the store might not be adequate enough. And so it's really important to work with your doctor to just identify exactly how much you should be supplementing and then what form is going to be most beneficial for you. All right. Then we have issues of reflux or heartburn. And so really, we're going to talk about the GI in specific here in a second, but really what we're talking about here is when we have that slowed motility, right, we can have some of the kind of hardening or issues with tissue in our GI tract. And really what that can do is promote reflux or heartburn. And so one of the things we can do to address this is small frequent meals. And we have any one large load, right, large meal, that's in our stomach because of that slowed motility for a little too long, and that can really promote reflux. Avoiding eating, close to bedtime. This can be important just because when we're laying down, those foods are when we're laying in bed, right? Those foods can easily come up if they're not being digested well. And so giving yourself some time to digest prior to sleeping. Avoiding specific foods that are most likely to promote reflux. So acidic foods, these could be things like tomatoes, citrus fruits, also coffee. And you'll see coffee here and in our caffeine as well, because even we find that decaf coffees often can promote reflux because coffee itself can be acidic. And so a lot of people say, oh, I'll just have decaf instead. And actually, we find that even decaf can be problematic enough. Spicy foods, so this could be your common spicy foods like things with chili peppers, right, and hot sauce, but also this could be pungent foods. So just dishes sometimes that are really pungently flavored could also be problematic. So that might be really strong flavors of things like onion or garlic and so forth. So just being cautious, and you might be impacted differently by certain levels of spiciness. And then caffeine and carbonation, so things like coffee and chocolate, some teas that have caffeine, and then also drinking soda or carbonated beverages. Just because this can promote reflux or heartburn as well. Sitting upright after meals can be a really helpful tool, just allowing gravity to do its work, right? Our gut motility, we have muscles in our gut that can kind of contract and move things through our system. But in scleroderma, often that ability is lessened or it's just not working well enough to move things as efficiently as it could. And so letting gravity help you out by walking around, doing a slow kind of leisurely walk after a meal, or just sitting upright for a good amount of time to help gravity move things through your digestive system. And then it might also help to sleep with your head elevated as well. Again, just allowing gravity to keep things from returning up into the esophagus. Okay, and now I just want to talk about a couple dietary approaches to scleroderma and really just understanding what those might be and if they could be appropriate for you. So first, we want to talk about scleroderma and celiac disease. This is a really common question if people who have scleroderma should be avoiding gluten. And there's actually some decent research studies that exist that suggest we don't really see a difference in prevalence amongst people with scleroderma having celiac disease. And so they are both autoimmune diseases, but it just doesn't appear that there's a specific association. That's not to say that they don't exist. Some people do have both, but there's not more of an association here than with any other two autoimmune diseases either. But I think it's important to consider, or if you are following a gluten-free diet or you've considered it, is there a risk of following a gluten-free diet if it isn't needed, right? Or if we're just doing it in case, right? And I would suggest, yes, maybe there is some risk to that. I really wouldn't recommend following a gluten-free diet unless there's really a medical reason to do so. And the reason for that is because all these nutrients that you can see here on this slide, these nutrients are often deficient in gluten-free diets. And we just talked about how important all of these things were to managing some of the symptoms that you might be experiencing and to just getting an overall adequate diet. And so that's not to say we can't get these things with a gluten-free diet. It's just really challenging, and we would need to make sure that we are either working with a dietitian or working really hard to meet our needs from other sources. Really, we know fiber for our digestion, right? Iron to help manage fatigue, calcium and vitamin D for our bone health, magnesium for our major organs, functioning, and our B vitamins do a variety of things like our metabolism and just overall function. And so we really just don't want to compromise these things by choosing a diet that we might not need. So like I said, just making sure that if you are going to follow a gluten-free diet, that it is the right thing for you and that it does fit your individual needs. Also, a lot of times I get asked about something like an anti-inflammatory diet. There's not really any one anti-inflammatory diet, although there are certain foods that have anti-inflammatory properties. And so some of those things include things like antioxidants, right? Increasing our antioxidant intake can be really important. In general, antioxidants or anything, or vitamins or minerals or other chemicals that we find, like phytochemicals that we find in food. And these are really in the pigments that we find in the skins of fruits and vegetables. So earlier when I was saying eat the rainbow, this is one of the really important reasons, right? Those deep dark pigments, especially in our dark greens, yellows, oranges, blues, red, purple. So you can think of blueberries, for example, or beets, or we have any of our orange things, sweet potatoes and cantaloupe have that nice orange color, right? That's beta carotene is an antioxidant as well. So really these can be important because they specifically can help protect our body from damage to our cells, to protein, to DNA, and they all occur as a result of stress, right? Or free radicals. And these are caused by inflammation. And so by eating, antioxidant rich foods, we can really combat some of that stress and some of those free radicals and really address this. If we don't address this, really that damage to our cells can worsen over time, and it contributes to issues of blood vessel disease, right? Other chronic conditions. And so it just makes this piece of our diet really important across the board. Also getting plenty of omega-3 fatty acids. We talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about our recommendations for fish being 2 times per week. We can also get this from, besides these fish sources, we can also get this from walnuts, ground flaxseed, and flaxseed oil as well. Soybeans and soybean oil also have some are omega-3 rich. So there's a few sources, but you can imagine you have to eat quite a large portion of walnuts to equal what you might get from a fillet of salmon, for example. And so that's why fish are promoted pretty highly because, in one serving, you're getting a really rich omega-3 content. Also, vitamin D and vitamin E are really important for fighting inflammation. I want to look at the GI related to scleroderma more specifically, partially because this is an area that I have specific training in, but also that we're seeing, more commonly able to address some of the GI concerns that you are experiencing. And so to start, just thinking about how scleroderma works, after our skin, the GI tract is the second most common target, right, that gets impacted by scleroderma. And so really what happens is we experience those weakened muscles. So what I was telling you about earlier, those muscles that kind of contract and help move things through our digestive system, these are weakened. And especially, in our digestive tract, these are important for just that motility piece, but also for the balance of the bacteria in our gut and things like that. So this is mostly impacted by poor blood supply. And so what happens is things move through much more slowly than maybe they should. And so the symptoms that occur because of that are heartburn and reflux, like we just talked about, but also we might feel full really quickly. We might find that we have bloating or we're experiencing unexpected or involuntary weight loss. We might also be feeling things like constipation because of the slow motility. And so all of these things can be a result of that weakened or slowed motility in the gut. Things that we can do to address this, we mentioned exercise a little bit earlier, but this really just helps kind of mechanically as we're moving our body, moving those muscles, and again, working with gravity to help things move through. Eating plenty of fiber can be really important. So fiber, as we mentioned earlier, can especially help to add bulk to our stool, but also gel with water and help things move through more regularly. So that comes from our whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, as we discussed. It's really important when we're talking about fiber not to increase it drastically or really quickly, right? We're going to get maybe the opposite effect, and it's not going to make us feel very good. So we really suggest increasing fiber slowly over time and kind of monitor for any symptoms related to that. It might also be helpful to either take or eat daily probiotics. So if we can get these from foods, that's ideal. So yogurt that has active cultures, fermented foods like kimchi, kombucha, kefir, all of these foods could also contribute great to natural probiotics. You could also take a probiotic supplement. We just often caution with this, and again, making sure that you're working with your doctor or dietitian on this, because sometimes we can start taking a probiotic and it can make our symptoms worse, right? We're adding a bunch of bacteria to sometimes an already overloaded system. And so one, we want to make sure we're taking the right probiotic. There are certain probiotics that might work better for things like diarrhea versus bloating versus constipation. And so we want to make sure we're taking the right thing and then the right amount as well, because these vary, anywhere from 5 billion to 50 billion to 90 billion, cultures. So we want to just make sure that we're selecting the right thing for your specific concern. And then increasing our fluid intake along with fiber. Hydration is a really critical piece to digestive regularity. And actually, even if we eat a high fiber diet, if we're not drinking an adequate amount of fluids, fiber is not going to be able to do its job because it uses water, and water is pulled into the gut to help things move through quite regularly. And so when we increase fiber, we also have to increase fluid, and that's a really important piece. And when I'm talking about fluid, I guess I can clarify, water is ideal, right? Getting our fluids from water, but also we can get some fluid from foods, right? Like soup or fruits that are really high water content. You think about watermelon, for example, it's 96 or more % water. So we can get it from those places, but we really want to try and meet our needs with water. And then any of those extra things are just a bonus to our fluid. Okay. And then the kind of last sort of diet approach that I want to touch on related to the GI is something called the low FODMAP diet. I don't know if many of you have heard of this. I know some of you have, but basically when we have this cluster of GI symptoms that include gas, bloating, diarrhea, or constipation, or maybe kind of oscillating between the two, we often find that we can get some resolution by removing a certain group of carbohydrates that are readily fermented. They're fermented kind of high up in the gut, and they feed some of those harmful bacteria that are causing these. And when bacteria gets fueled, it releases gas, which creates gas, cramping, and bloating. But also some of these foods, right, they can draw water into the system, and this is what might cause diarrhea if that's something that you're experiencing. So to resolve a lot of our GI issues, sometimes we start with things like wheat or dairy, which are included in this FODMAP approach. Because these are often hard to digest and may provide some relief, but there could be other foods that are the culprit. So if you've already tried things like wheat or dairy and you haven't noticed any change, it might be worth exploring some of the others. This can be a very restrictive, and it is a very complicated diet and dietary pattern. And so we only use it when we think it's appropriate. And also just to know that some people do have really great resolution, so it could be worth exploring. But because when we have scleroderma on board, we're already at risk for malnutrition and nutrient deficiencies, it's really important to not try and do this diet on your own. It's really complicated, and so we like to work with individuals to work through this in a systematic way and do it correctly, because we're only going to see resolution if we're able to actually, do this diet pattern appropriately. So never do this on your own, and make sure that this is a good fit for you before taking it on. So when we're talking about the low FODMAP diet, essentially, I'll go back one. So you can see these, I didn't say these words here. So fermentable, and then these other letters are standing for these different types of carbohydrates. So these are just big words that all are meaning a certain type of carbohydrate. And so that's what we're going to be referring to when we say FODMAP. But essentially, these carbohydrates or sugars in these certain foods just tend to be poorly digested, and they tend to be absorbed by the gut. And so when we're eating these foods, this kind of cluster of symptoms can occur. And so when we eliminate these foods, often our gut can have a chance to kind of get that bacteria realigned and back into a kind of balanced relationship, right? And then also, it's important to note that we never eliminate these foods forever. We eliminate them until we have resolution, and then we add them back really systematically, because it's not necessarily true that you're not going to, excuse me, that you're not going to tolerate all of them. It's actually more likely that there's one or two culprits, and in that reintroduction phase, we could identify what those trigger foods might be for you. So this is just a quick list here. This is not comprehensive by any means, but this just kind of shows you how the foods in each group might interact with the gut. And so starting on the left, high lactose foods, these can create gas and also pull water into the gut that might cause diarrhea. Excess fructose, which also can pull water into the gut and cause diarrhea, are fructans or galactans and oligosaccharides. They can create gas as well. And then our polyols, which are like our sugar alcohols. These can pull water into the gut and cause diarrhea as well. So you'll see there's a variety of foods on here. And like I said, this isn't even a comprehensive list. So you can imagine how difficult it would be to eliminate all of these foods. And so this is why we really recommend working alongside a dietitian, and specifically a trained dietitian who's trained in this diet, because it is very complicated and very challenging. If you are considering following something like a low FODMAP diet, first, seek advice from your physician or healthcare provider. Make sure that we feel like it's a good choice for you, and only undertake this with the guidance of a registered dietitian. Ideally, someone who's trained in this area. Like I said, I'm specifically trained by Monash University. They're the ones who developed this diet, and they're the ones who test the foods to determine their FODMAP, content. But also, we have another dietitian at CSU who also is trained in this area, who I work with. But you can always look on Monash University's website. They have a list of providers in your area, so you could look for someone who's trained nearby. Always use caution when researching this specific diet online. There is a lot of contradiction and a lot of misinformation out there. So I would utilize either Monash University. Like I said, they developed this diet, and they're going to have the most up-to-date and accurate information. Also, Kate Scarlotta, that list I just showed you is one that was developed by her. She's an RD and a FODMAP expert, and I don't know her personally or anything like that, but I just find that her materials are very well done, very consumer friendly. And so I find the information on her website to be very accurate. So she could also be someone, and I think I'd have to look, and I could share this with you, but I believe her website is called Digestive Peace of Mind, I believe. And so if you're looking, but you could just look up her name and FODMAP, and you would find a lot of great materials that she has online. As I mentioned earlier, really, we don't want to eliminate these foods long-term. This should not be a long-term diet. At most, we might be eliminating these foods for up to 8 weeks, but traditionally more like 4 to 6 weeks. And then we will reintroduce these foods in a really kind of well-planned and systematic way to make sure we can really identify your individual tolerance to this food. Also to note, there are simplified versions of this diet, and they might be adequate. So if you're concerned with things like malnutrition, or you're already experiencing excess weight loss, or you're underweight, taking on a really restrictive diet with hundreds of foods that you can't have might not be a great idea, right? We don't want to compromise these other concerns. And so we do have simplified FODMAP kind of approaches that identify kind of the main foods that might be most problematic, and starting with those, because often we see that just a few foods can provide resolution without, taking on the entire diet. So then we have some additional considerations here. Really, it can just be challenging when we're thinking about eating a healthy diet. If we're struggling to prepare meals or complete tasks in our kitchen that maybe we could do, and now it's difficult because, for example, we don't have as much mobility in our hands, for example, or mobility in general can be difficult. And so some of the things that we could do to make modifications could be, remodeling our kitchen, which might be a really kind of big change, right? Things like making your cooktop and stove at a comfortable height, making it accessible, or having a kind of tabletop or a built-in microwave, so you're not having to reach above and things like that. But also just thinking about having a tall stool, right? If fatigue is a problem and standing in the kitchen cooking for a long period of time, or doing prep work is challenging, just having a stool with a supportive back, you can sit and do some of your cooking and chopping tasks as well. Also, using modified utensils, this can help specifically with that limited mobility in the hands. And so some examples of that I'm just showing right here. So thinking about anything that has that kind of easy grip that allows you to kind of get your whole hand around it. And thinking about, whether it's knives or spatulas or graters, you can kind of see a few different ones here, but anything that's going to have that large grip or a finger attachment, like you can kind of see in this left-hand corner with the grater, it's just a finger attachment. So you don't have to grip your hand around it, but you could just slide your hand back and forth across there. But just note that, whether it's modifying your whole kitchen to accommodate you or just buying a few utensils, it can be really useful to find a few things that just make cooking and eating more easy, more seamless, and more enjoyable as well. Some things that you also could consider when you're trying to, eat a nutrient-dense diet, if you're having trouble with things like cutting and chopping and grating veggies, think about spending a little bit of extra money on those items that are pre-done. So for example, buying a bag of broccoli that's pre-cut, or buying shredded carrots rather than shredding them yourself, for example. And so if these are challenges that you're experiencing, it could be very worth your while to just spend that little bit of extra money for that ease of use. If you're having concerns about things like oven or stovetop safety due to this limited mobility, you could try more recipes either in your microwave or in crock pots, or also in Instapots. That's kind of all the rage right now, to fun ways to cook there instead of over the stove. And so just thinking about some alternatives that you might feel more confident and comfortable with. All right, so we've covered a lot of different things here, but some of the kind of takeaway messages, or the bottom line here, is one, we know that scleroderma looks different for everyone. And so really taking a customized approach and working with your healthcare providers to identify what that might be for you is important. Eating a nutrient-dense diet is critical. It's going to help address a variety of these symptoms, but also hopefully help to prevent some of them if you're not experiencing them now, by just keeping our body at its highest functioning and at its best. There is no one specific diet for scleroderma, so it's important that this is customized for you based on your unique experience. But I do suggest being cautious of restrictive diets, and that's even including the FODMAP diet. Like I said, especially I think being trained in it, it's important that we recognize when certain diets aren't appropriate as well. And so that could include a gluten-free diet. That includes, there's a lot of autoimmune diets out there, and they can be extremely restrictive. We have a lot of other concerns that we need to be on the lookout for. And so the one thing we don't want to compromise is just getting adequate overall nutrition. Invest in modifications or tools that are going to make cooking and eating more enjoyable for you, or more easy, to do regularly. And then lastly, getting support. Work closely with your doctor and a registered dietitian to best ensure that you're getting adequate nutrition for your specific needs. One of the best places to start, or to start conversations, whether it's with someone like me looking at your diet, or even with your doctor, could be to keep a food and symptom journal. This would really help to highlight what you're experiencing and what your nutrition status currently looks like. And especially for us, when we start seeing clients, looking at this journal can help us to identify patterns or potential trigger foods for you that might allow us not to go down a really restrictive route, but just pick one or two things that we know to be problematic. As I mentioned, I work at the Kendall Reagan Nutrition Center at Colorado State University. We offer one-on-one counseling there, and currently we're virtual. So even if you're not in the Fort Collins area, we can see you if you're in the state of Colorado, which is great. We're just seeing people via Zoom like you are here today. But we would love to work with you if you have specific questions or want to kind of customize a diet that's going to work best for you. We do have 2 trained Monash dietitians, so myself and one other dietitian in our center. And so if FODMAP diet, for example, is something that you've thought about or are considering now, we can definitely help you with that. But also, I've been working with a scleroderma support group now for several years, maybe 4 years or 5 years. I can't remember the first time that I came to speak. And so these symptoms and some of these specific concerns you're having are something that I've worked with a variety of times. So I would be happy to do so. I put our phone number and the email to our center here. So if you'd like to connect or to get an individual appointment, this would be the best place to reach out.